We want the truth. We can handle the truth. The only question is, what in the actual hell is the truth? Frankly, thanks to the media, thanks to politicians, and thanks to a whole lot of distrust built up over the years, we've got no clue in America where that truth is going to come from. I'm Andrew Coppens. This is Critical Thinking right here on MoJo 50 Radio. Of course, you can listen live each and every Saturday at 5 p.m. via iHeartRadio and Spreaker. But I've got a bigger announcement for you right now. Head on over to the Facebook page for MoJo 50 Radio, and you will now see this show each and every week. That's right, folks. This beautiful mug for your viewing pleasure each and every week, including all the screw-ups and fun stuff in between. No, seriously, folks, we have a lot to get to, so let's just get into it today. Of course, we're going to talk a little bit about impeachment up front, but I'm also going to have a guest here in the first half hour of the show, and her name is Mailee Smith. We'll be talking about the Chicago Teachers Union strike. Yes, we're going to talk a little bit of local stuff because, America, you need to hear this because this is all about a pattern that's happening across America with the teachers' unions. She's from Illinois Policy. She is a really great numbers person. You're going to want to hear this. Then in the back half of the show, we're going to be talking about AOC's new socialist plan to cure all that ails America. And I'm going to ask a very important question. What if we stopped paying our taxes? Yes, folks, it's going to be a very intriguing show right here on MoJo 50 Radio. Now, I have to ask you this. When we're talking about the truth here, it's very clear we're not going to be able to get it from the media because, frankly, whether it's left or right, they've just gone to their corners and they're arguing over the definition of is. I mean, seriously, folks, go on Twitter and watch them just argue over, yes, this document says this. No, this document says that. It's absolutely, utterly insane. And then you've got the politicians who care more about winning elections than they do telling you, the American people, and me, the actual truth. They don't care about that. Yes, they've got a ton of hearings coming up. Yes, all of these things are coming up. But take a look at what's happening with Adam Schiff right now in the whole, well, all he did was give somebody some advice. Really? Are you sure it was just advice or was it something more? We don't know because none of you want to get to the actual truth. So here's where I stand. Give me the actual documents, the actual words, the timeline, the evidence, and let me parse it out for myself. Since none of you can actually be totally trusted to tell us the truth, the whole truth, and so help you God, nothing but that truth. All right. Obviously, there's a ton of international insanity. Let me just zero in on some local insanity. Yes, it's the return of Chicago Crazy in my interview with Mailee Smith of Illinois Policy. And joining me now here on Critical Thinking is Illinois Policy's own Mailee Smith. She's going to help us sort out one of the local issues that really I think is national. Mailee, first off, we look at you, you're the staff attorney, head of labor policy for Illinois Policy, which is really a free market think tank and advocacy group in Illinois. And for people who don't live here, that might sound very strange to think that there are people who advocate for free markets in the state of Illinois. And first off, when we've got you on here, why don't you just give us a little background on Illinois Policy before we dive into this impending Chicago Teachers Union strike of doom?
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, Illinois Policy is a free market think tank, or we bill ourselves as a taxpayer advocacy organization. So as you alluded to, that keeps us pretty busy in Illinois. Our range of issues goes from budget and tax to union issues like we're going to talk about today, pensions, good government, really the full gamut of fiscal issues that keep, people questioning what's going on fiscally in the state of Illinois.
And for those on MoJo 50 Radio who have been paying attention to By the Numbers, my daily segment on MoJo 50 Radio, you would know that I have talked about teachers' union strikes for quite a while. And what struck me about Chicago's strike that's a little bit different than the others is that I look at this through the lens of critical thinking and I see a $900, probably closer to $1 billion budget hole that the city of Chicago has. Then you've got a teachers union that's striking. or potentially striking, and really is ratcheting up the language and the rhetoric here, coming up to a potential strike on October 17th. What I find ironic here is this really about doing what's best for the teachers or the teachers union? Because what I see is that budget hole, and I see a massive grab of money coming from the teachers union. Those two things cannot be a coincidence at the same time.
Exactly. What we see here is the union, Chicago Teachers Union, flexing its political muscles. By way of background, CTU's mayoral candidate was Tony Preckwinkle.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't win. And now it won't accept the generous deal that Mayor Lori Lightfoot is offering. So it's poised to launch an illegal strike. And I use that word specifically, illegal, because the things that CTU says that it is going on strike over are things like staffing, nurses, community schools. The problem is it would be illegal for CTU to strike over those things. So what they're doing is they're using kids and the people of Chicago who are already overburdened with taxes. They're using them as pawns in this political power play, trying to save face in a lot of ways, because their candidate, they poured almost $300,000 into the candidacy of Preckwinkle, and she didn't win. And that's a big blow to a union that thinks that it is all powerful. So now here it is, using kids, using the people of Chicago, basically holding them hostage, and trying to save face and show that they still have an immense amount of power.
I totally agree. I think when you look at this, and by the way, for people that are outside of the city of Chicago, Preckwinkle lost to Lightfoot by something like almost an 80-20 margin, and it was not. That was totally unexpected for me. I knew that Lightfoot was going to win. Living here in Chicago, that was a pretty obvious situation, but I didn't expect the margin of victory. So what that means is, on a political level, you have a mayor that has a lot of power and a lot of capital built up with the constituents here in the city. So you've got two really powerful situations kind of colliding here. But outside of the state of Illinois, outside of the city of Chicago, I've mentioned strikes in, I think there was one in out in the East Coast, and there was one in Los Angeles last year. I find all of them to kind of have very similar, and this cannot be a coincidence either. All of them have very similar demands that they're making of the cities. So for people in America, when we're talking about the specifics here, pay attention, because this is stuff that's going to come your way. Now, when we talk specifics here, what are some of the demands the union is making, and what are some of the things that, basically where is the crux of the potential to strike or not strike?
Sure. So CTU is demanding 15% pay raises over 3 years. So that's 5% a year. Reductions in their contributions for health insurance premiums. They're demanding over 4,000 new staff members, 55 new community schools, and just those. And there are a number of other demands, but just those things alone, the salary increases, the extra staff, and the community schools would cost more than $1.1 billion over the next 3 years. Compared to what the mayor is offering, it would only cost $216 million over the next 3 years under her proposal. So there's a great disparity in the cost to Chicagoans. And so, I mentioned there's other things they're demanding, and they're almost illogical in these types of demands. They're demanding help from Chicago Public Schools, help for new teachers to buy homes, a moratorium on school closures for the next 10 years. 10 years, that goes beyond the contract itself, the limit of the contract. Yeah. So regardless of what the economy dictates, and we know that people are leaving the city of Chicago. So CPS, Chicago Public Schools, would be on the hook for the next 10 years not to close any schools, even though we know from the last 4 years, each of the last 4 years, they've been losing population. So these are things that not only are they making demands on with regard to salaries and health insurance, but they're going beyond really even the jurisdiction of Chicago Public Schools, beyond the jurisdiction of the union for sure. And like I said, some of these things that they're demanding, it would be illegal for them to strike over. There's a reason why even Illinois, and I will say that Illinois is an outlier when it comes to teacher strikes. It's the only state in the region that explicitly sanctions teacher strikes. And yet even Illinois has some provisions in place that would prevent a union from walking out over these sort of demands.
Now, mind you, everybody that just heard what Mailee had to say there, this is under the backdrop of a city budget that is at least $900 million in the hole just for this next fiscal year. Where's that money going to come from is my big question, because at the end of the day, CPS gets its money from the city, and the city gets its money from its taxpayers. And they're already going to have to come to the taxpayer, yet we're seeing them want more money and less pay in from the people inside the union. I find it to be absolutely insane, these types of demands.
And the taxpayers just are not in a position to meet these demands. If CTU got its demands and the entire cost was paid through property taxes, a Chicago family in a median value home would pay $221 more in the first year of the contract alone. Now, $221 may not sound, like a lot of money, but we're talking about a population, residents that are already overtaxed. They saw $864 million in annual tax increases under Rahm Emanuel. Property tax bills have already grown 55% faster than personal incomes from 2007 to 2017. And they also, Chicagoans pay the highest sales tax rate in the nation. So, they are already overburdened. And there's a reason why people are leaving Chicago. Chicago's population has dropped in each of the last 4 years. So, it begs the question, who are the real victims here when CTU is across the bargaining table from Lori Lightfoot and her team? It's not Lori Lightfoot and her team. It's the people of Chicago. It's the students who are going to be disadvantaged. Studies show that strikes negatively affect student academic outcomes. So, the discussion is about the union demands and the cost, but, these are real people that are going to be feeling the effects of this.
Now, what the union will say is that they're just looking out for their workers' long-term health. And I can understand part of what they're trying to do here, because I think it's a naked ploy for them to get as much money as they possibly can before this ship completely sinks in the city of Chicago, right? They're going to make the city, they're going to make CPS get on the hook for as much as humanly possible, and then the ship goes sinking so that the next contract that they come in with, they don't have to ask for any of this stuff. They don't have to fight over any of this stuff, because they know that the next time they come through and ask for a new contract, that money's not going to be there.
Yeah, that could be a strategy. But we also see with the history of government unions in Illinois and also across the nation that they are constantly asking for more. The history of Chicago Teachers Union is to ask for more. And that is why government unions are so powerful and so different from unions in the private sector. When government workers go on strike, they are threatening to shut down government functions that people need. It isn't, like I said, it isn't the party at the negotiating table that suffers. It's the residents themselves. And government unions know that that cost can always be passed on to the taxpayers. Whereas in the private sector, there is a budget, and Hostess is a very good example of what happens in the private sector when workers go on strike. Hostess actually shut down. Now we all can enjoy a Twinkie now that they're back, but there was a time period when Hostess shut down because its workers demanded too much. They couldn't afford it. There aren't those kinds of checks and balances within government sector union relations, so they can just keep demanding more.
And along with that, I guess the bigger question here is, in order to win this type of a battle, you've got to have the citizens on your side, right? I think when you look at this, the citizens, if you're CTU, have got to support what you're doing. And I don't necessarily see that. So at some point, do you think the citizens here in the city of Chicago are really going to support forking over more than they already are? Not to mention all of the budgetary issues that are already on the table that Lori Lightfoot has held listening sessions on, and we'll see where this comes in. I think this is just poor timing on everybody's part because we're talking about a budget, we're talking about the CTU budget, we're talking about all of those things lumped into one, and I think it's really difficult for the average citizen to really be on the side of teachers asking for more when they see the rest of what's happening.
Exactly. And to put this into context, it isn't just CTU that is going on strike. They're certainly the biggest Chicago union that is poised to go on strike right now. Last night, or on Tuesday, they set a strike date of October 17th.
Mm-hmm.
That same day, two other unions gave notice that they plan to go on strike the same day. It was SEIU employees that are also employed by Chicago Public Schools, as well as SEIU represented employees in the Park District. So you have three different unions that are coming together in this power play, like I mentioned earlier, to basically shut the school system down, to shut the park districts down. And you bring up an interesting point. In the past, such as in 2012, there has seemed to be at least some community support for the teachers. But we're seeing some different language this time around, even in some of the publicity. Both the Chicago Tribune and the Sun-Times actually has called for the CTU teachers to take the deal. Politico in the last week has pointed out just the political power play that is going on here. So, CTU does not seem to have the support of the community that maybe it did in the past. And when you add these other unions in as well, this is just going to put people in such a poor state, not only financially in the future, but just, that week alone. Their kids can't go to school, their kids can't go to the park. It's really going to put so much more of a burden on Chicagoans and likely put a bad taste in their mouth for what the CTU is doing.
I totally agree. I think you hit the nail on the head with it's not just one section, it's three different sections of public service unions. And the one that really struck me was the park district, and basically saying we're going to go on strike at the same time. So guess what? You and your kids, nope, you're not coming to the parks. You're not going to the after school programs. You're not doing any of that sort of stuff that would at least alleviate the burden or the extra burden from the average Chicago citizen. And we're talking about people, single mothers. We're talking about one-parent households that might be doing two jobs just to pay the bills. We're talking about real life effects on these people. And I think what you're going to see is a big-time turn on what used to be the biggest and I would say most powerful of the unions here. I think they're making and overplaying their hand when it comes to this entire situation. I think they didn't see the forest through the trees. I think they overestimated all the budgetary issues that Chicago's going through. And I think what they really overestimated was their position with Lori Lightfoot.
Exactly. And as just going back to the beginning of our conversation, I think this is about saving face. It was surprising, as you mentioned, not only did Preckwinkle, CTU's candidate, not win, but she lost by such a degree that people weren't expecting. That, it really is something that CTU didn't expect. And it calls into question, just how powerful are they? Well, now they're flexing those muscles, and they have a mayor across the table that they didn't want to win. And they're calling in their allies at SEIU to also walk out at the same time. And that's why I just go back to the kids. I go back to the parents. They're holding them in this position of a pawn in a game. it's a political game. And I don't want to sound like that's rhetoric, but they are the people that are the victims here. They will be affected negatively in the short term because they won't be able to go to school. They won't be, involved in the curriculum that they have been a part of for the last month since school started. Right. But in the long term, if CTU gets its demands, like I mentioned, it's $221 more a year in property taxes for the average median home. What is coming out of the family budget for these people? Is it tutoring? Is it sports? What about seniors who are on a fixed income? What can't they afford to do because now they're paying more in taxes? And, the average home, the average person in Chicago makes $63,500. Right now, the average teacher makes $79,000. And under CTU's demands, that would increase to almost $100,000. So, they're putting people in a terrible position who don't have as much as they have.
No doubt about it. And just to put this into further perspective, like you mentioned, with the average salary increasing from over $70,000 to nearly $100,000 per teacher here, we're also talking about already it would take them from the second highest to the highest paid teachers in the entire country. And this is also from a city, again, that I cannot stress is in deep financial trouble as it is with their own rest of their pension obligations that we just heard earlier this week that are $7 billion short of what Rahm Emanuel said. So you add in all three of these things. I think this is a poorly timed situation for CTU to make this kind of a power play. But at the end of the day, what is the best outcome for the taxpayer in all of this? And what would you say would be a loss for the taxpayer?
Well, first of all, the best outcome, in the short term is that the teachers don't go on strike. The best outcome at this point would be that they take the deal offered by Lori Lightfoot. There was a neutral fact finder who suggested that Lightfoot give the teachers 16% pay raises over the next 5 years and just a 1% increase in health insurance premiums over the next 5 years, which is minimal compared to the average nationwide. So, that is a good deal for the teachers. So best case scenario at this point, they don't go on strike. They take this deal by Lori Lightfoot, and we see kids in school on October 17th.
Yeah, I really hope that is what we end up seeing, because in all of this, the kids are what should matter the most. And it just seems like it doesn't matter to the people in the positions of power within the CTU. And we've seen that all summer long from their response to the scandal with, and I covered this briefly on a previous episode of Critical Thinking, the scandal with teachers that went over to Venezuela and basically had a Maduro propaganda situation happen over there. You just see these guys not necessarily caring about the rank and file teachers, let alone the people they're supposed to be protecting, the people they're supposed to be serving, the kids.
Right.
And
exactly.
And with that, I think we are just about out of time here on this little segment of Critical Thinking. Mailee, how can people follow your work and Illinois policy in general if they're interested in the things that are happening in Chicago or in Illinois in general?
They can check out our website. It is illinoispolicy.org. We have a blog and articles that are there, as well as other reports outlining what's going on in Illinois with regard to the unions and pensions and other fiscal issues throughout the state.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me. And hopefully before October 17th, maybe we can get you back on if something happens where a strike is somehow averted. I think that's a little unlikely based off of the fact that you're seeing multiple unions lining up to do the same thing. But we shall see. Weirder things have happened in this very windy of states.
Thank you for having me.
All right, America, it is time for us to take a break right here on MoJo 50 Radio. On the flip side, it'll be AOC and her prescription for all that ails America and that discussion of what if we just stopped paying our taxes? Why am I bringing it up? Well, you'll just have to find out as we return right here on MoJo 50 Radio. Welcome back to Impeachment Free Talk Radio. Yes, I'm your host with the most numbers, Andrew Coppens. This is Critical Thinking here on MoJo 50 Radio. You can follow me on Twitter and across the social media platforms at The Coppens Show. That's Coppens, Coppens. And I hope you do follow. But most importantly, if you're used to listening each and every week live via iHeartRadio or Spreaker, thank you so much. But if you're the visual kind and you would rather see the show than listen to the show, you can pop over to the Facebook page for MoJo 50 Radio, and you can find my beautiful mug just waiting for you right there. But with that being said, where are we going in the second half of the show? Well, I told you that we'd be talking about AOC's socialist cure for all that ails America. That whole thing continues. And then I'm going to ask the question of, what if we didn't pay our taxes? Obviously, up first, we've got to talk about AOC. Now, while all of America has been in this impeachment train, in this whole haze of everything that's going on with impeachment, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez decided to unveil her just society for the world to see. Now, what would this just society be? Well, of course, I'm going to dig into it. But before we get there, have you heard one single word about this entire thing? That answer is no. You have not heard a single thing about this. And that's because the oxygen has literally been sucked out of the room. All the media can focus on, whether it's left-wing media or right-wing media, is Donald Trump, impeachment, Joe Biden, who he said he didn't, he did, she didn't, whatever's going on with all of that stuff. So as I'm really fond of saying, whenever you see or hear scandal, pay attention to what else is happening more than the actual scandal that's in front of you. It will always tell you what is in store for you and your fellow Americans. In this case, it's the just society. It is coming our way, folks, especially if Bernie Sanders, who, he had his heart issue, and as somebody who's had people in their family affected with heart issues in the past, I really wish Bernie Sanders all the good health humanly possible. Nobody wants to see anybody getting hurt like that and having all the things that can happen with heart conditions. So speedy recovery to you, Bernie Sanders. Even if I don't agree with a literal single thing you have to say, I still want you to be in good health. So please get well soon on behalf of myself and everybody here at MoJo 50 Radio. What is this just society that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez would like us to believe? Well, it's actually 6 different bills. Yes, that's right, folks. 6. Not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, but 6 different bills. Well, it's actually 5 bills, 5 bills and a ratification. So we're going to get into the details here because it's really important to understand what's happening here. The number one bill in this whole just society situation is the Recognizing Real Poverty Act. So you'll have to excuse me here because I'm obviously going to be reading some of this stuff because holy cow, 6 acts to go through. So what's the Real Poverty Act? It raises the federal poverty line to $38,000 a year. That's what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, now mind you, believes would be poor, the poverty line. That would triple the number of people who would, quote unquote, need assistance in this country, by the way. Let me say that again, triple that number. The fact that AOC also, by the way, believes that somebody earning nearly $40,000 on average in America is poor and needs assistance should tell you just how out of touch she is and just how much she believes in socialism. I'm going to get a little personal in this scenario. $38,000 is around what I used to earn for doing customer service work. Now, was it an easy life? Was it, I can just go out and do everything and anything that I ever wanted to do? Of course not. It was a struggle to pay all of the bills and do all of those things. But there's a difference. There is a market difference between being able to pay your bills or struggling to do extra things and being actually poor and needing federal government assistance. Now, if you look it up, if you do that math, it's somewhere in the average of about $100 or more per day. Now, I want you to think of this number. The average American today spends over $200. It's somewhere around $210 to $215, depending on the study that you look at. Over $210 a day is spent by the average American. That should tell you all you need to know about where this poverty line is. Now, the average American also tends to make around $60,000 to $65,000 a year. That's the average salary for an American across all backgrounds and, all things being equal. The generalized situation here would be about $60,000 to $65,000. Are we really supposed to think that half of the average or more than half of the average somehow is now the poverty line? It's just insane. Why would she want this? Well, duh. One word: control. She wants to control the situation. She wants you and me and anybody else that's at that level to start getting onto the government rolls, to start having to rely on them for those little extra things, right? What's the difference if you could get them to pay for some of your housing? Suddenly you've got extra money to do something else or whatever have you. It just feeds the beast, right? You need it. You have to have the government in your life. That's the goal here, is to get people to start committing to and start understanding how government can provide for you. Once they've got you doing that, the rest of the socialist sell is really easy. Now, let's go ahead and move on to number 2 on her list, which is the Place to Prosper Act. Now, here's the deal. Are you ready for some national rent control? What would this whole rent control do? Nationwide, it would limit an increase per year in rent to 3%. 3%, folks. That's absolutely insane. I will say this, if you've been paying attention to me in the past, over the summer, I talked about a situation very similar to what AOC is proposing. The only difference being it was a city in Australia. Yes, I'm talking about Sydney, Australia. Now, I did this in June on a By the Numbers segment, and thankfully, Reason has a ton of really great content for this type of a situation. So I wanted to kind of go over this for you, because what happened with this? Well, according to the Sydney Morning Herald, the city had seen more than 30,800 multi-unit dwellings built last year, a record for any Australian city. There are still nearly 200,000 additional dwellings in various stages of development. Pretty much a glut driven by whom? Investors. Why? Well, because there's money to be made, because they've got rid of artificial supply limits. That's the key here. It says here, this overabundance in rental properties has spread across the economic spectrum. Median rents in some more expensive parts of the city range around $1,400 to $1,700 a month in US dollars, by the way. And there are parts of town where the median rental price is $850 a month, thanks in part to the oversupply. Now they have more supply than they have people wanting to rent. That means lowering the price, and you, the consumer who decides to rent in Sydney, Australia, are the winners here. Now, I want you to think about this. In San Francisco, according to this recent article, in June, the median rental rates for a one-bedroom apartment, $3,600 a month. $3,600 compared to $1,400. $1,400 to $1,700 at the high end in Sydney, Australia. Why would that have happened? Now, according to a policy expert for the Tenants Guild of New South Wales, quote, at a citywide level, we've had rent prices set by restrictive supply for at least 14 years, probably longer. It will take more than a few quarters for prices to correct to equilibrium. So yes, let's go back here to the United States and let's go back to what AOC has to say about this. Of course, she wants that rent control because that is the answer, right? Again, if the government can control how you live, how you consume things, how you do and interact on a daily basis with the basics of life, if the government's got its claws into it, it can start to control everything and become really socialist and not just big welfare state socialist, if you will. You're going to see this become the slippery slope if they were to ever pass this type of legislation. Luckily, I think a lot of people see through this as a bad idea. So that's just the first two acts, by the way. Number 3 is the Mercy Reentry Act. And what it is those who have felonies and leave prison gain full access to welfare rights. Now, admittedly, I have not looked too deep into this one as to what type of economic impact it would have and what certain studies may say about the reentry and adjustment period that felons go through when they get out of prison. Now, my gut instinct would be this. Shouldn't we be focusing our money and our efforts on programs and on education inside these prisons that would allow them to not have to rely on the government when they get out of prison? Maybe as a society, we should, take these people and show them that their education and that the things that they did inside those walls, as long as they were productive things, are rewarded by society. You paid your debt. Perhaps we should give them those opportunities instead of government handouts because everything is so damn difficult for them when they get out of prison. That's just my gut feeling on this. I will come back to this in a little while. Now, number 4 on this list is the quote-unquote Embrace Act. Now, check this out. You're going to find a real familiar tune. It's all about welfare. Because illegal immigrants, and thankfully I'm not from New York, so you can't find me there, Governor Cuomo and Bill de Blasio and whoever's involved in that in New York, but illegal immigrants would be eligible for welfare like Medicaid, unemployment benefits, and food stamps under this act, federally available across the board. Now, as I've pointed out in various segments on both By the Numbers and this show, illegal immigrants are already getting a lot of welfare benefits. That includes food stamps, which are not supposed to be, free or reduced lunches for kids, and it's costing the taxpayer a ton of money. Now think about this. According to the Center for Immigration Studies, now, I readily admit that they are very much of the anti-illegal immigrant variety, but this particular study, when you look at it, what they have studied are readily available statistics from the federal government. They haven't done any manipulation of data. All they've simply done is taken the data and gone, oh, okay. So, to the tune of 63% of all illegal immigrants receive some form of welfare already in this country. So the question becomes what? Do we do even more of it? Or do we crack down on them getting these benefits already? Now, yes, you can make the argument that a lot of these welfare benefits are because they have children that are involved in our schools and some of those things, so they can qualify for things like food stamps because of their kids and all of that. I still hesitate as to where to go here because I don't quite know the full impact economically. And those numbers aren't available because, here's a shocker, the CBO hasn't really scored all of it just yet. Number 5 is the Uplift Our Workers Act. That's right, folks. Uplift Our Workers Act. Whatever could that be? Whatever could that possibly be? Oh, that's right. Here's what it is. The final bill instructs the Department of Labor to prioritize the awarding of federal contracts to companies that have paid maternity leave, a $15 minimum wage, and so on and so forth. So, that's right, folks. Now you're going to have to abide by paying your maternity leave, $15 minimum wage to your workers, so on, and so on, and so on, to the point of it's whatever the federal government tells you that you have to do in order to get a federal contract. That includes, companies that make military equipment. That includes companies that want to do roads. That includes all sorts of insanity when you think about who contracts with the federal government. It's not just some nefarious thing. It's not just some, grift and graft or whatever you want to call it. This is a deadly serious scenario at play. What they're now doing is laying the groundwork for the biggest part of socialism: control over business. They're going to exert control over private businesses. That, folks, for me, is the first step in the two-step process. You make private businesses have to conform to a different set of standards than they would if they were just regular customers. The second step then is, once they start accepting that, why don't you just take them over? Because if you're regulating what they do anyway, what is the difference between that and your benevolence as a government just taking over the industry? We're going to take over road construction. We're going to take over Lockheed Martin or Oshkosh Truck or Marinette Marine, who provide tons and tons of military weapons and ships and Humvees and all of those types of things, right? Why would we want them involved when we can just take it over? There was a sixth prong to this entire situation, this entire justice society. Number 6, well, that is to ratify the UN Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Okay, folks, if it says UN, it cannot be good, and you would be right. So, folks, here is the language that AOC wants us to sign off on from the UN Covenant. Quote, have the right to work. Now, people, quote, have the right to work, fair and just conditions of work, social security, an adequate standard of living, including adequate food, clothing, housing, and healthcare. Now, obviously, I don't find AOC to be a credible source of thought of her own. This is not something that she just came up with on her own. To be real honest with you, this is the exact proof of a theory that I postulated way early in our discussions together, way back in like one of the first 2 or 3 episodes of this show, that AOC is just a puppet of the Democratic Socialists of America, of whom she is a dues-paying member. I want you to think about this. This is the DSA. This is their blueprint all the way. These are the things that they have been talking about for years if you've been paying attention to them. That is them talking, not AOC having her own thought in this entire situation. Now, speaking of the DSA, or the Democratic Socialists of America, I've got to say this before I get into these people properly. People all over this country are being fooled by this whole cover of democratic socialism. I've had many of a discussion on Facebook or with other friends about how Elizabeth Warren is really a capitalist. She's just, if anything, a democratic socialist. Folks, these people are literally telling you they're on the road to full-on socialism. They're just doing it in the nice way. These people are just putting socialism into democracy somehow, thinking that people will just accept socialism if it's fed to them in the form of democracy. Don't be fooled by this anymore, folks. If you hear somebody saying that I'm just a democratic socialist, bullcrap. You are just a socialist wanting to use the levers of democracy to obtain your socialist aims. And by the way, the Democratic Socialists of America, lest you think this is a fly-by-night organization, 75 members have already been elected to various positions throughout the United States. 7 of them are on the Chicago City Council. There are people from school council boards, city councils, state representatives, local judges, even all the way up to people like Rashida Tlaib, AOC, and that whole, whatever you want to call them, crew. They're infiltrating the mainstream, or at least deciding that socialism from the ground up is the way to go here, folks. Their platform on elections changed this year from passively endorsing to creating a full-on party that promotes socialism. Now, I want you to think about this. This is from their own manifesto, their own thing that they came up with this year, folks. Instead, the NES recommends DSA follow a new model of electoral organizing focused around developing independent electoral capacity and building a sustainable socialist organization. The new model entails chapters building an independent field and canvassing operation around endorsing candidates. DSA locals should strive to build the tools and skills necessary to run a campaign, from running canvases to maintaining data, developing democratic socialist messaging, and conducting policy and opposition research. The goal of the strategy is twofold. First, it will allow chapters to break out of the electoral cycle. The skills necessary to run an electoral campaign are transferable to running issue-based canvassing, and the data collected during an electoral campaign is especially useful when developing targeted canvases to push for issues. Second, the strategy will allow DSA to operate as an independent electoral force and build working-class power outside of the Democratic Party. Think about that. They're literally saying they are trying to set up their own political organization. That's all you need to know in this scenario. They are becoming an actual party. They are actually coming out and wanting to work their way up from within. And if they do it well enough, and they do it often enough, and they win enough, suddenly we have socialists right in front of us, and we can do nothing about it because they were elected into office. And guess what? Socialism, here we come. Not just, welfare, but full-on socialism can become their aim. Make no mistake about it. They're telling us right here, folks, that, my friends, should scare every freedom-loving person in America. It should also make you wake the ever-loving hell up. I teased this question of, what if we stopped paying taxes? Now, I've long held the position that taxation is theft, straight up theft. I know for many it is a radical position, especially in the city that I call home. But for real, outside of the common defense, things like, police, fire, emergency, the military, and then things that we agree on locally like sewer and water and those types of things. Outside of those things that, even if you didn't want to necessarily say that they're common defense or their commonality, if they're agreed upon locally, I think that's where taxes kind of live and should live. But I don't believe federal taxation is right. I also happen to believe that if left to our own devices, Americans would solve a lot of the so-called problems that exist with ingenuity and free will, free markets, capitalism. I know, strange thought process that if you were to give people more of their money to keep and less of the government collecting your money, and do not forget, they're not just collecting your money and putting it in a lockbox. They're collecting the money and then earning interest off of your money while it's sitting there before you get your money back at the end of the year. Without that interest, by the way. So why do I bring this all up? Well, this comes in response to what Fairfax County in Virginia did to one of its police department officers. It suspended one of its officers earlier this week who had the temerity to hand over an illegal alien to ICE. Now, how did that happen? Well, said illegal immigrant got into a car accident and, didn't have a license. So the officer was doing a simple routine check to figure out who was this individual. They found out there was an ICE warrant because the person failed to appear for his deportation hearing. Yes, my fine friends, the deportation hearing. So, what did the police chief have to say about this? Well, he said, as a matter of full transparency to our community, our police officer violated our long-standing policy and deprived a person of their freedom, which is unacceptable. We have been informed by ICE that the driver was released after 3 hours and issued an ankle monitor. When I learned of this event, I directed an immediate internal investigation to look at all factors in this matter to ensure that all are held accountable for this violation. Our county is one of the most diverse counties in the nation, and no one should have the perception that FCPD is acting as a civil immigration agent for ICE. This matter damages our reputation and the longstanding policy that I have stated many times that our officers shall not act as immigration agents. The officer involved in this event has been relieved of all law enforcement duties pending the outcome of this investigation. It is my duty to enforce our FCPD and Fairfax County policies and hold all accountable for their actions. Now, there's a couple of things that were wrong with this whole statement. First off, there's no such thing as a criminal warrant for ICE. So, this whole illegal immigration thing, they're all civil cases, thus not entitled to what? Due process of law. Now, that being true, there's also no violation of a right because they have no rights under administrative law. Now, this is a growing trend, including Chicago's top police brass having to send out a memo that all cops are to literally leave a scene where ICE is involved. Deadly serious. They have to leave the scene when ICE is involved. All of these things combine to ask, for me, the question of, why are we paying our taxes if enforcement of our laws are not being done by the people who are supposed to enforce the law? You're violating the very laws that you're supposed to be upholding. Why would I condone that with giving you money? I don't understand that. Now, obviously, in this situation, I think it's a little difficult to, in practice, say double middle you-know-whats to paying federal income taxes and paying federal taxes at all. Because here's the rub in all of this. We're already conditioned to pay those taxes no matter what. In fact, there's no way of getting around paying those taxes up front. The only way that you and I could really rebel against some of these things is to do what? Not actually file the taxes. Now, that would not be a smart move for many people because why? The federal government already has your money. You can't get what would be rightfully owed to you in a refund if you don't file your taxes. And therein lies the crux of the problem. Because again, this goes back to government control. There's nothing you can do. It's not like you can go to your employer and say, oh, by the way, take that payroll tax out of there and take my income tax. I don't want to pay that anymore. You can't do that right now under federal law. So what I'm saying is there needs to be a structural change to the law to give us more freedom of redress of grievances to our government. That whole constitutional right of redress of grievances that exists. With all of that being said, I hope you've enjoyed this episode that's been pretty much impeachment free. I'm Andrew Coppens. Of course, you can always follow me on the social media sites at The Coppens Show. Coming up next is Matthew Holloway and the HollowNet right here on MoJo 50 Radio. Until next week, I'm Andrew Coppens saying be smart, be strong, and keep on being the awesome people you are.